everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. As always, I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today, we have Inspirational Instagram number 6. These seem to be pretty popular. We have a good selection today, so let's get into it.
Yeah, I love looking at these. It's great just to talk about some wonderful underwater pictures. And I think it's great fun as well, highlighting some photographers that maybe people haven't come across themselves, who are doing really interesting work. And we start with Sammy Glenn _dives with this spider crab aggregation shot, which I'm guessing is probably from Australia, probably from Melbourne area in Victoria, but I'm not sure.
Yep. So Sammy lives down there, dives those waters all the time. And I know you photographed this as well, I believe, or maybe you did it in the UK or something.
Yeah, in the UK, we kind of did the first photos of it. I had, without wanting to make this about me, I had a friend who was the scientist who discovered it kind of in the UK. And he was one of my colleagues, actually one of my lecturers when I was an undergraduate, and then one of my colleagues when I worked as a marine biologist. And I, went and spoke to him about it and used his information to go and find it with my friend Dan Bolt. The two of us went there and we just kind of swam around in circles. Oh, Peter Rowlands came with us as well. But I remember me and Dan swimming around in circles a lot to try and find it on the surface and diving down and popping up. And when we found it, we put a buoy there. And then I think Peter Rowlands came in. The sly old dog that he is. In the UK, though, we tend not to get them mounding as much as they do in Australia, which is why I sort of said straight away they mound. In the UK, they tend to aggregate but not really create this thick mound. And I think this photo is amazing for showing that mound. And, I always used to call these, spider crab arachnophobia, in that it's an amazing wildlife spectacle. But if you don't like creepy crawlies, this can set you off a bit. So it's a really cool shot by Sammy Glenn.
I'm not a spider guy. I don't mind. I like crabs, but there comes a point where I feel like there's probably too many crabs. And this might be over that line of too many crabs. It might creep me out a little bit, but a spectacle for sure. And like you said, it's a really cool picture to show just how many there are, that they build that big, kind of crab tower.
Yeah.
And I think if Blue Planet 2 or Planet Earth 3 or something has a whole segment on this from Australia where you can see the whole thing live, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and actually underwater it was quite, because they're moving as well. It draws your eye even more to those horrible legs all moving around. So it really sets you off. So yeah, very cool shot, and it brings back some memories for me as well. Okay, I'm gonna move on to our next one, which is by McLachlan Wild, which is Andrew's shop. I hope I pronounced the surname right. It's one of those things. It's funny, you know people online, and you maybe don't know how to pronounce their name, and it's so entrenched in your mind, you're kind of just used to saying it a certain way, and you've probably been saying it wrong for forever. So, and this is a picture of a triple fin. I'm not sure of the species, actually, and I've never seen one with so much green coloration in it, sitting on a star coral.
I loved all the colors in this, and I like how even though the triple tail is not, well, I'm colorblind, so red and green look pretty similar to me, so it's probably more camouflage to my eye than maybe some others. But I like the fact that it's kind of well camouflaged. The composition's really nice, and I like that there's not a ton of texture. I think that might actually take away from it. It's just a cool natural history image.
Unusual comment from you there.
I know. But it's a cool natural history image, because this is how you would see it more with your normal eye before you put in any sort of funky lighting. And it's a beautiful little fish, a beautiful little scene on a healthy coral.
Harder and harder to find everywhere, but particularly in the Caribbean.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know the triple fin species either. Back in the day, little me would have known, but I don't remember it anymore. But
I think it's called a lofty triple fin, actually, in the Caribbean.
Maybe.
Yeah, but yeah. Anyway, very cool. And yeah, really nice shot. I mean, I think these shots are a classic of underwater photography, where you have that texture, that pattern, and then you have a disruption in that pattern from the fish. And actually, it was something I was going to say about our previous picture, if I just roll us back one, is that I love the crab pattern. but it would almost, I think, if you had some sort of disruption to that pattern in the crabs, it would make that picture more interesting, and quite a lot, you quite often get the stingrays coming in to feed on them or other things, octopus, and where they make a disruption in the pattern. And I think that's why the coral picture works. Obviously, it's not such an exciting pattern as a million crabs, but that coral pattern being disrupted by the fish, I think, is what makes it graphically interesting. And yeah, I think it's a common underwater photography trope of that pattern disrupted. And I think it's something that I always enjoy in a picture. Okay, I'm going to move us along now to our next one, which is by Kate Yonka Photography. I've always pronounced Kate's surname with a Y sound rather than a J, but it's South African, so who knows? It could even be an H. So it might even be Honka. Who knows? So I've always said Yonka in my head. So another test for me. But Kate's picture here of this tiny little amphipod crawling over probably a bit of an enemy, but I'm not sure. I think this is very, very small indeed.
Yeah. I should have looked at the caption. I didn't even think about it. I assumed it was algae, like bubble algae, which we have here, similar. So, but I don't know. But usually, I love this because I like small in the frame macro images, and I struggle to shoot those kind of pictures. So whenever I see one that's successful, it stands out to me. And normally, your inclination would be to shoot this thing as big in the frame as possible, which would be difficult because they're so small. But I think this gives a sense of scale, and like it's traversing some lunar landscape when it's wherever it's going. And it's a beautiful little ladybug. I've never seen one quite like that before. And I know South Africa has some pretty spectacular looking ones. I don't think we have them here. So it's another case too of seeing something that I don't get to see. So that's another reason it stands out to me.
Yeah, no, it's a cool. Kate's a really good macro photographer. I really like the way she's very good at, I think, particularly in cold water diving, creating well lit, very punchy, colourful macro shots in conditions where a lot of people kind of are struggling to get a good record shot. She's creating really artistic and strong images, and I think her work's well worth checking out. On this one, I like the main aspects of this picture, but it feels to me like I think I'd quite like to have just had this even simpler. Just that one ball with the one isopod, the amphipod on it, I think would have just been really stunning. I'm not sure that the second ball really adds very much to this. And I think, a more graphic composition, you imagine a shot with a great, ball of algae or an enemy tentacle or whatever it's balanced on, and then this little guy somewhere sitting on top of it. I think that could be really graphically very strong. But I suspect these guys probably hop about the place. The ones we have in the UK certainly do. And I think that they can be a real challenge to shoot, and just getting the little buggers in focus is already an achievement. Okay, I'm going to roll us on to our next one, which is by Underwater Pat, and it's a picture from Tierra del Fuego, and it is an incredible kelp forest picture. Yeah.
Anything with kelp stands and sun rays is automatically a winner for me. And especially because usually you see these pictures, it's from Monterey or somewhere like that. So it's cool to see one from a place that very few people dive. Down at the very tip of South America. And it looks like the kind of place that you would just have fun floating through. There wouldn't even have to be fish or anything for me to look at. That's just one of those environments that you can just go and dive in for the sake of diving in it. And it's just completely enjoyable. It's magical is probably an overused word when it comes to underwater or even landscape environments, but I think kelp forests are about as close as you can actually get.
Absolutely. And I think it's sad that actually so few divers get the chance to dive them. Obviously, if you have, if you're from California or somewhere like that, you think that's a strange statement. But I can assure you, if you're from the rest of the world, it can be surprisingly difficult to get yourself into a kelp forest. And it's such a unique diving experience and one of the most amazing diving experiences. It is always sad that that it's not something that every diver gets to do. In the same way that the first time you dive on a coral reef, that's really alive and buzzing, and there's a million fish of a million colors and, corals of every shape and size everywhere. that's an amazing underwater experience that obviously most people get to do, because most people do get to dive on a coral reef, often quite early in their diving careers. I think the kelp forest is equally amazing, and one that far fewer people get to experience. I love this shot, for the atmosphere it creates. I love the subtlety of it. I think a lot of photographers maybe would have gone in and, maybe strobe lit a bit of the foreground to try and create, a focal point. And I think just realizing that the scenery, the experience, the place was enough, and not feeling, oh yeah, I need to have a great school of fish cruising through here, or I need to have a foreground subject, and just accepting that the scene is beautiful. And then for me, it's the management of the light. I'm sure that Pat spent some time positioning him or herself to be in a position that just stop the surface overexposing. The way they've hidden that sun enough so that you don't end up with this big bright white surface, but you still get the beams coming through, and you've also got the exposure in the green through the kelp forest that creates depth in the composition. There's a lot of mastery of light and composition in this picture that really makes it work for me. So yeah, really impressive picture.
Wants a whole bunch of really cool kelp forest pictures from Patagonia and Monterey. Pat, his Instagram is filled with really cool stuff.
And I think that Pat is probably, is Pat's name, or is it?
Yeah,
Pat is Patagonia.
Pat, he lives in Monterey.
Okay. So he's experienced with this type of environment, and that's really cool. Just photographer really using their skills and knowledge of a certain environment, and then being able to go and shoot something like this, probably where no one's ever shot a decent shot before, potentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, and another more Californian stuff. This one from Ralph Pace from Monterey in California. I presume it's Pace and not Pache, but it's California, so it could be Pache from Mexico. But I've always assumed it's Ralph Pace.
I think so. I think it's Pace. But yeah, this is really cool. The last 2 years, California's had these big Vela explosions, which are like a man of war relative, I think.
Yeah.
And the molas obviously follow them. And I talked to Ralph about this one, and he said they only had like 4 feet of visibility, so they couldn't see any molas, but they were probably there. But the whole surface was just lined with Velas forever, it seemed. And I've only ever seen them washed up on the beach. I've never seen one in the wild, and I've certainly never seen a carpet of them underwater. And I think just a really cool kind of abstract natural history image. Yeah,
really, definitely really cool, really different, really interesting pattern, and I think visually, really surprising image. We call them in Europe, I don't know if you call them in the States, we call them by the wind sailors, which is kind of all hyphenated, kind of a bit of a mouthful of a name, because they have these little flaps on their top surface, which I think there's a couple of them upside down in this melange of them here. And that flap helps them catch the wind and drift, and also is part of the reason they aggregate. I remember when I was living in Sardinia, we had them wash up. And in fact, they were this Easter as well. I think they had another bloom washed ashore, and absolutely stinks the place out because you have them all rotting on the shore for a few days. But didn't have the chance to swim with them in the sea. But yeah, fascinating. And I presume they're quite stingy, so probably not the nicest thing to submerge under.
Probably not.
Yeah. But really, just a completely original and different underwater picture. I presume the visibility was bad and it limited what was possible. Yeah, I think I would have liked a little bit more of this in focus, photographically. But that may well be just that it was just murky conditions and this was always possible. But it's such an interesting pattern. I don't see why it's that photographically, why you wouldn't want it corner to corner, all sharp. But that may well have been, the fact that the water was completely murky and it just wasn't possible. So we don't know enough about the backstory on that one. Right, I'm going to move on to Little Mermaid, which, given that the picture is from Canada, that gave me a clue on how to pronounce this one.
Yeah. So I think she shot this in Washington because she lives in Washington.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Still cold. And it's a fish that continues to elude me despite many trips to the Pacific Northwest. It's a decorated war bonnet. But I mean, look at the face. How can you resist that? Those huge lips, the goofy hairdo, the big expressive eyes. Just a really cool portrait. of a really, really cool fish. And I like the big nostrils too. I actually hadn't noticed those until just now.
Yeah, it looks like
Um,
they've got inlets and outlets, there.
yeah.
That big tube, I presume, is the inlet. So they kind
Yeah.
of, because fish don't breathe in and out through their nostrils like we do. So fish do always have an inlet and an outlet on their nostrils, because it's kind of a through flow nostril, rather than a in and out like ours.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, have got a tremendous anatomy, and they are fascinating fish. When I first started going to that area, and I used to go with a group of friends, with Todd and Rand and Jamie and John and those guys I used to go up there with. They were really addicted to these guys and would literally just spend all their dives looking for them. And we used to see a lot of them. And when I went without them this time, I found them very hard to find. And I did spend a lot of time. I spent much more time looking for these than I did for Woolfields or GPOs. And I did find a couple, and luckily I found a nice one in a nice yellow sponge. But apart from that, I found them really hard to find this time. Whereas in the past, maybe because the guys had found them and we knew they were on a site, and then you were re-finding something you knew was there rather than trying to find something you didn't know was there. I used to be able to find them much more easily. So I don't know whether there's less of them now or I'm just diving with the wrong people.
They seem to be pretty like site fidelic. So I know if they're seen in a spot, at least the big ones, they'll kind of just stay there. That doesn't mean I haven't had the chance to go look for resident ones whenever I've been up there, and I've never seen one up at God's Pocket. But I think a lot of the times they're found pretty, at least in Washington, they're generally found deep because they use a lot of the cloud sponges, which only grow down, well below 100 feet. So obviously they're seen shallower and in other spots, but I just haven't been lucky enough to come across one. But it's just such a cool face.
Yeah, and it's such a beautiful eye as well.
Really nice. Exactly. All those different colors in there.
Cool. Right, let's roll on to our next one, which is by Sage Ono Photography, and it's a picture of a slender filefish in amongst sea rods in the Caribbean. So yeah, for me, really nice to see photographers taking on Caribbean subjects. I think they tend to get a little bit, like the Caribbean reef subjects, tend to get a little bit ignored by serious underwater photographers who tend to be, traveling off to places further afield.
Yeah.
This for me, I really like this shot. This is kind of, to be honest, the way I shoot. So if someone said to me, "Oh, Alex, you probably took this," I would have said, "Yeah, maybe I did." I don't remember. So I really like this shot. It's visually the way I like to see coral reef animals photographed, with a balanced light shot, interesting composition, depth in the picture. So everything about this shot sort of appeals to my personal sensitivities when it comes to photography. So really nice picture.
Yeah, and again, it's another example of that small in the frame macro image that I struggle with. So it appeals to me greatly because I haven't figured out how to actually do it. And then obviously the composition lined up perfectly in between those two front fronds, and then all the ones in the background works really well. And the filefish are cool. They're definitely something I see them all the time here, and they're one of those things I'm like, oh, there's another one, and I just kind of swim past it. And I know I shouldn't do that because someday there's going to be a lot less of them. It'll be harder to find, and I'll regret not having pictures. But really
I've found, going to the Cayman Islands regularly, that their population definitely goes up and down, and there'll be trips you do there, and there, you see 2 or 3 every dive, and then there'll be another trip, and you see 2 or 3 through the whole trip.
Yeah, we don't have the slenders. We have the slenders in Florida, but they're not overly common. We have like plainhead and fringed are the two that we have most commonly here, and you'll see, at least generally, you could see 15 or 20 fringed on a dive without really trying too hard, and a couple plainhead. But they generally they don't use the same kind of habitat, so they're generally in much less aesthetically pleasing settings. They like the muck and the rubble and trash and all that kind of stuff. Whereas
this is a really nice shot and not easy to get, because it's easy to visualize in that, let's have a nice shot of beautifully arranged, arms of the soft coral, and then the filefish perfectly placed against a nice distantly blue dark background within that, nicely on the third in the composition. Easy to envisage this shot, but it's not an easy shot to get by any means.
No, not at all. And especially because those filefish, when they hang there, they do this kind of thing the whole time.
Yeah, and they'll move behind the fronds, and the fronds are all moving, and
so a really good job.
Right, our final one is another fairly challenging one. It's this picture of a ribbon fish
Yeah.
lining up what it looks like its prey. It certainly looks like it's keen on what it's looking at.
Oh, I thought they were like friends.
Well, yeah, I think anything that fits in your mouth in the sea is not your friend. And this is taken by Dive and Seek in Florida.
Yeah. So Josh is one of my best friends. He's become a Blackwater addict, and he's got quite a good Blackwater portfolio now. But he got this one pretty early on, and I've loved this picture since he first showed it to me. Just because the ribbonfish is cool enough by itself, it's a stunning little animal. And then you have him looking perfectly at whatever that other little fish is. And like you said, now it occurs to me it probably was going to be food. If
you can carry on thinking it's for their friends. I don't want to burst the bubble.
In my head, I was like, they're friends. They're just they're just hanging out looking at each other. But a really cool, and it's not often you get to see the Blackwater animals in images interacting with each other. So I think it's a really cool picture that stands out for that reason. I love the position of the fins. They're kind of like flared out. And then the tall one off the top of its head.
Yeah.
And perfect, well exposed, and just a beautiful little scene.
Yeah, I think particularly because the ribbonfish is coming at the camera, it stopped it flaring, and really cool. And the fins stand out wonderfully well on the background. Yeah, but for me, it's that eye contact between the two. From the big fish to the little fish that's soon to not be a fish, works brilliantly well. Right, I think then that's a good place for us to wrap this one up. Thanks for watching the Underwater Photography Show, and we'll be back again soon with another episode. Do check out the comments on this one and the description, and we'll have links to all those photographers' Instagram accounts. Take care.